Right, Rabbi Isai, Siman Tov Pei Test, the halachas of Sfiras HaOmer. We're discussing the ideal time to light the Omer. We said last time that ideally it should be lit. Each person should count the Omer from Nacht, from nightfall, and the Di'eved could also be counted from Shkia, from Ben Hashmoshes, from sunset. There's an earlier time called Plag HaMincha, which the Bialocha, which we'll see today, and the Sifta we'll see today, discusses. And Bialocha says, Yesh Mekim Shenogu, some places have been accustomed to say the Sfira already from Plag HaMincha, although it's not ideal, but he would fulfill the mitzvah, he wouldn't have to count again with a bracha. Now the Shulchan Aruch is discussing the following scenario. A person is davening with a minyan, and this minyan are counting early. That means it's not Nacht yet, it's in the twilight period. And the question is what this fellow himself should do. He always counts with Nacht, which is the correct, the Medaktikin, Shulchan Aruch and Sif Beis said the ideal, the correct way is to count with Nacht. He's in a minyan that they're counting early. It says in Shulchan Aruch, page 190, Tov Pei Tes, Seif Gimel. Or somebody who's davening with the congregation, he's davening with them early, and it's before Nacht, it's Ben Hashmoshes. He can count with them below bracha without making a bracha. In fact, he should count with them without making a bracha. And if he remembers at night, then he counts again with a bracha. Now, already, this is questionable, difficult to understand. I mean, if he's counted already from Shkia, and perhaps he's fulfilled the obligation by doing so, how can he later count again with a bracha? And if he's counting again with a bracha later, that means he's filling mitzvah counting later, so why is he counting earlier? What for? So let's see the Mishnah Berurah of Cotton Tesai. He's in a minyan and they are davening early and they're counting early. Early meaning before Nacht, after Shkia. It says Mishnah Berurah of Cotton Tesai. Yesh Ma'achronim, the Arachronim, Shapir, they explained the Hainu Ben Hashmoshes. We're talking here in the twilight period. To Sofik Laila, it's questionable if it's night or not. The Yotin Azide Sfira, they can fulfill the mitzvah Sfira, according to the poskim, the Sfira that hold the Sfira Bisman Azed Rabbanon. We take on the Sfira nowadays as the Rabbanon, most poskim, and therefore one could be yoked to the mitzvah in this questionable period of Ben Hashmoshes. However, who wrote to the this fellow wants to be particular. But this to count the correct time, the ideal time after Nacht. The Shulchan Aruch says, he should still count with them, in case he might forget to count later. You're going to ask me, if he's counting earlier, how can he recite a bracha later? It says in the Mishnah Berurah from the Mogen Avraham, he should think the following stipulation: if I remember later at night, limnos to count, then in that case, I don't plan to fulfill my mitzvah with this counting. Yeah. And therefore, man, later on, he can make a bracha and he can count because he's only counting early on the understanding, or on the position that he will forget to count later. If he remembers to count later, then the correct counting will be the one later. That's what fulfill the mitzvah, if he recite the bracha, and the earlier counting was null and void. That's how the Mishnah Berurah explains from the Mogen Avraham. So that's how Mishnah Berurah explains from the Mogen Avraham. The Taz, actually, he's got a different slant on this completely. The Taz, it says that the person, of course, does not want to be yoked to now at all. He's only planning to be yoked to the mitzvah later on, which is the correct time to fulfill the mitzvah. And this fellow is only being yoked to later, and that's why he makes a bracha and recites it later. And he's not making any condition, we shouldn't make stipulations with regard to when he wants to fulfill the mitzvah. And the reason he's counting with the community is just so that they shouldn't think he's not counting. So the Shulchan Aruch says, although he's planning to count later and he's fulfilling his mitzvah later after Nacht, nevertheless, you should still count with them. They shouldn't suspect him of not counting the Omer. That's how the Taz meant. But that's not the way the Mogen Avraham, not the way the Mishnah Berurah. The Mishnah Berurah says this fellow counts during Ben Hashmoshes without a bracha, on the understanding that in case he forgets later on, this will be the Sfira, but hopefully he's going to remember later and fulfill the mitzvah later with a bracha. Sif Cotton, the remark continues. And even if he answered Amen to the bracha of the Shliach Tzibur, when he cited the bracha early. So you may have thought, if he said Amen, maybe that shows that this is really a proper sfira early. Nevertheless, if he had specific intention not to fulfill the mitzvah at that early time, he can count again later with a bracha. Now the Mishnah Berurah here is concerned. Why does he have to have kavanah not to be yotzer? Says the Mishnah Berurah, Sukkot Yud Zayin, for dafke miskaven sheloi lotzes al bistoma. He doesn't have any specific intention not to be yotzer. Then he could be fulfills his mitzvah. If he will fulfill his mitzvah, the man mitzvah saying shvichas kavanah. If we take on that when one performs the mitzvah, one doesn't have to have kavanah. He planned to perform mitzvah to actually fulfill the mitzvah. If that's the case, well, this fellow would have fulfilled his mitzvah when he counts early. And therefore, it's only if he actively thinks, I don't want to be out to the mitzvah, then he'll be able to do the mitzvah later after Nacht with a bracha. After Paskin on the mitzvah, shvichas kavanah, are you going to tell me that what? We Paskin and Sivan Samach and Chos Kriyashma. The mitzvahs need kavanah, and therefore, even if the person didn't have specific kavanah not to be yotzer, just he had standard, parav, simple intention, he wouldn't be yotzer because he needs positive kavanah to be yotzer. Says the Mishnah Berurah, Efsha perhaps the bracha shetzarach l'haskeshem shemayim tzarach l'achach shel hachdea. Perhaps since the concern here is making a bracha later on at night, perhaps he would be concerned that maybe if he had parav kavanah he would be yotzer. Like the mandama in Svichas Kavanah, and therefore the Shulchan Aruch covers himself by saying he should have Kavanah dafka not to be Yotzer, and therefore he can make the bracha later, and when he counts later. That's how the Mishnah Berurah learns. The Shatzian points out that in truth, if you look in Siman Samach, we'll see that by the Rabbanans we pass mitzvahs in Svichas Kavanah, by the Raisa Svichas Kavanah. So therefore, since with the Rabbanan we pass mitzvahs in shvichas kavanah, and since this is a mitzvah d'Rabbanan, therefore only when a person has absolute intent not to be yotzer, he won't be yotzer the mitzvah. That's what the Shulchan Aruch says in Data Sheloi Lotzes. Then he can have later with the bracha. The Aruch HaShulchan, the should bring us down in 53. The Aruch HaShulchan says that since you're davening here with the community, so therefore there's an assumption you would want to be yotzer unless you have specific intent not to be yotzer. Okay. Says the Mishnah Berurah Sivkot Yud Ches, Vivorech v'yispa b'layla, makes a bracha and he counts at night. Says the Mishnah Berurah, V'afilu b'erev Shabbos, even on erev Shabbos, shekvar kibbutz Shabbos, he already accepted Shabbos. V'gam mitzpalalim atzibur, he's already davened with the community. Afilu hochi, nevertheless, Vivorech v'yispa b'layla, he counts again with the bracha. He counts with the bracha at night. Kiven shleirot zolot says b'mashem misipim bon benash moshes. He didn't want to fulfill the mitzvah of Omer at that earlier time. You did want to bring Shabbos in, Kabbalah Shabbos, Marif, but you didn't want to fulfill Omer till Nacht. Once this, if the stars come out, you can count, even if you haven't done Marif yet, even on Motzei Shabbos, the time is right. So once it's night, you can count for sure. There's no question anymore. One can even make Kiddush and Havdalah before davening, and you just can't do Melacha until one does Havdalah, meaning until one says Baruch HaMavdil. But once one says Baruch HaMavdil, one can do Melacha, and one can make Kiddush and Havdalah before davening Mariv, which is an interesting point. As far as I know, the Mishnah doesn't bring this down in Hilchos Kiddush and Havdalah, but it's good to know if a person needs to, he can daven. You can say Havdalah or Kiddush before Mariv. Havdalah as well as Kiddush can be said before Mariv. So what's the Shulchan Aruch told us? Shulchan Aruch told us this fellow, he wants to be yotzer the ideal way, which is after nightfall. He can, and he's davening in a minyan that are davening early, and they are counting the Omer early. So he says the Omer early with a stipulation he doesn't want to be yotzer with this unless he forgets later, and then later he can recite the bracha and the Omer, the correct time, the ideal time, I should say, after Nacht. And even if he answered Amen to the Chazan, still, provided he had intention not to be Yotzer, he could still count later with a bracha. Okay. Says the Shulchan Aruch Sif Dalet. A very interesting scenario which we are quite familiar with. Somebody whose friend asked him Benash Moshes in this twilight period, which is already a period which you could fulfill the mitzvah. Kami mea sfira, what night of sfira is it? Was that Laila tonight? Yemaloi, you should answer. Esmaloi kach v'kach. Last night was 5. Yemaloi hayom kach v'kach. If you say, yeah, tonight 6. today is 6, let's say. You won't be able anymore to come with the bracha. Because you've already said that the sphere of today is 6. If it's just before bin hashmoshes, before sunset, given she'ein is man sphere, since it's not a time of sphere, then it's not a concern at all. Again, the Shulchan Aruch holds that before Shkia is not a time to count. He never mentions counting before Plag, but the Alocha, as I said, he says there are places that count before Plag, but the Evet, he says there are places that count before Plag. The person push come to shove, we wouldn't protest somebody who counts from Plag. Which really cotton your test. Benesh Moshes is in twilight period. Knock up Benesh Moshes, but the evidence Benesh Moshes, we're talking a period that the evidence be goats if he said the Oime. Kolshin or the Mosa, if his friend asked him it's already nightfall, what night is it tonight? You should be careful to say Hayim Kach today is so and so, because that could be considered a sphira. Even in English or French, any language, if you just say 33 or 22, without saying the day, today, less than what is not a problem. Main spheres when you say today is such and such a number, just to say somebody asks you what that yom is and you say 6. That doesn't mean that's not considered a sphera. I'm just thinking to myself, what if a person didn't say today, he said tonight. Tonight is so and so. That should be the same thing. It should be the same thing. That would be considered you've counted that day, or at least a concern that you should be considered you counted the day. So we always say yesterday was so and so. In the Yachal, you won't be able to answer to say the Omer later. The Afal Gavs that Omer Ba'omer, although you just said today is the 11th, yeah, you did say of the Omer, Yotz B'Diavad, or Yotz, if it doesn't say Ba'omer, or even if it's Ba'omer or Lo'omer, makes no difference. If you don't say either of them, you take a Le'el, as we saw above, B'Sif Kot and Ches. Lachser V'Limnes B'Bracha, because if he does say today is the 11th, you won't be able to have the Bracha. Shekva Yotzi de Sphira, he's already fulfilled the mitzvah Sphira. The man to Omar mitzvah say Chesrichas Kapana. According to Pin and the Holz, you don't need Kapana to fulfill the mitzvah. Although you didn't have Kapana to be Yotzer, but you fulfill the mitzvah. After non Cameron, the Shrichas Kapana, we pass you do need Kapana. Zeh Halay Kevin Rotzis was a day mitzvah, and this fellow didn't plan to be Yotzer the mitzvah. So the question on the Shulchan Aruch, which is being asked now, is true. He said today is the 15th, but he didn't plan to be Yotzer the mitzvah. And if we take on the mitzvah Shrichas Kapana, mitzvahs need Kapana. And I suppose the assumption here is that either Tzvir Soma is a deraisa, or that even by Drabanas you need Kavana. So if the fellow didn't have Kavana to be Yotzer, so what's wrong to say today is the 15th? He didn't plan to be Yotzer. Says the Mishnah Berurah, the Indian bracha with regard to reciting a bracha later on, one has to be strict for Lochashan to be concerned. Of the opinion, don't forget that by the point of the question here involves reciting a bracha later after Nacht on the Sphira. So for that, to recite to say Hashem's name with a bracha, to recite a bracha later, we could only do if we are sure the fellow is not being Yotzer. And since earlier it could be his Yotzer if we hold Mitzvah Yichus Kavana, so therefore one should say yesterday's number rather than today's number. The Eshay dates, there's another suggestion. Sheikhab Befesh, one should have explicit intention. I don't want to be Yotzer the Sphira. When you tell your friend, today is the 11th, but you intend, you have specific intent, you're not to be Yotzer the mitzvah. The Achronim say, we're talking Shashalas, it came Shavuos, before it was Shavuos time. That means not Shavuos time. If the counting involved mentioning the weeks, not just the days, then I feel even if somebody says today is the 15th, Lav Kluma is nothing, because he hasn't mentioned the weeks that are involved. So he's going to have to go back and count with a baracha anyway, because he wasn't Yotzer earlier, because he just said today is the 15th. But since he hasn't mentioned Shavuos, he won't have been Yotzer. The interesting thing with this is that the Mishnah Berurah here appears to say that if a person just mentioned the days without mentioning the weeks, he's not Yotzer. Well, we learned earlier in Sifkot and Ches, Zayin, if a person mentioned the days and didn't mention the weeks, generally he is Yotzer. So it could, the Bishatian addresses this point. He brings one suggestion that it could be we're talking on a day 7, day 14, or day 21, etc., which is the conclusion of a week. in which case saying the weeks would be would be necessary. If the person didn't say it, he would not be yotza. Another suggestion here is, also brought in the Shanatzian, that this situation where he's not really mentioning the Omer anyway, he's just being asked what day of the Omer is, and that coupled with the fact he only mentioned the days, not mentioned the weeks, is enough of a reason to say he's not being yotza already, and he'll only be yotza later on. Right. Okay. Says the Mishnah Berurah, Sheyagia Hazman, and right. So that's on the next piece actually. So the interesting thing is here that the Bialocha brings down the Taz doesn't understand at all actually. Why should a person have to say specifically? What's the whole concern here? If he mentions the day, surely he doesn't want to be yotza. Just when somebody asks him what day it is, he wants to be yotza with a bracha later on. And should be considered as if he has kavanah specifically not to be yotza. And then the Bialocha goes into the discussion that it could depend if you hold mitzvahs shrichas kavanah, mitzvahs ein shrichas kavanah, which we mentioned before. If you hold mitzvahs don't need kavanah, so therefore perhaps he is yotza, even though it's unlikely he wants to be yotza. Also, there could be a distinction whether it's a deraisa or drabanan. Additionally, if it's bein hashmoshes, one could be lenient if the person always only counts after bein hashmoshes. Again, it makes it even all the more unlikely he wants to be yotza now. It's as if automatically he has kavanah not to be yotza. Therefore, we can say it with a bracha later on. So we've seen today in Sif Gimel, somebody who's davening with a community, although it's not nacht and he always counts with nacht, he should count with them. Morgan Avram says, and the Mishnah Berurah says, he should stipulate at that time that he doesn't want to be yotza if he's going to remember later. Only if he's not going to remember later, he wants to be yotza, and therefore later on, when he remembers, he can count with a bracha. In the Sif Beis, we see when a person asks you what day of the Omer is, you should not say today is so and so. By doing so, it could be a yotza already, and therefore one should always say yes, today was such and such a date. The person just says 22 or 43 doesn't mean anything. He hasn't mentioned today. And also, if he only mentions the days and not the weeks, that also he's not yet with that. He can still count again later. And the Bialocha adds also the person, if it's during Ben Hashmoshes, he's asked there's additional reasons to be lenient. Yeah, I'm just suggesting myself. I haven't seen it anywhere, but I'm just suggesting that if he has somebody who will remind him later to count the Omer. In the case of Sif Gimel, you're davening in a minute, they're davening early, but you have somebody who will remind you, or you have an alarm clock, or you have something like that to make sure you'll say the Omer later with the bracha. Perhaps you don't have to say the Sfira with the community earlier, because you can rely on the Shomer who will remind you to say it later with a bracha. Thank you.